Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third BGANZ webinar for 2025. It's fantastic to have you all here with us. To those of you joining us on Facebook, welcome. To our Instagram streamers, great to have you here. And we also have people joining us over on YouTube and on LinkedIn. So a big welcome to all of you to our BGANZ webinar, which this week falls in BGANZ week. So this is going to be a fantastic week, and Cass from BGANZ will be jumping on in a second to give you a little bit of a lowdown on what is coming up in this wonderful week of all things botanic gardens. Our third webinar this week is titled From Local Roots to Global Reach, the network of botanic gardens. And it's a fantastic topic. And the thing I love about it is that this is all about the structure of botanic gardens, the framework that we've got our larger regional botanic gardens, we've got local botanic gardens, we've got our major botanic gardens in cities. And as BGANZ, Botanic Gardens Australia and New Zealand, we have a wonderful network and footprint of botanic gardens that we can all be a part of. And that's really what we're about with these BGANZ webinars, bringing the faces of these gardens to you in these talks with wonderful topics and threads for you to connect with and take out and share, particularly over the month of May, which over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been framing as Botanic Gardens Month. But Botanic Gardens Week is the main week where a lot of activities are held across our gardens, which you'll be able to enjoy. So just to get us underway, I'm coming to you today from down in Melbourne. And to start things off, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wiradjuri Woiwurrung people and acknowledge traditional owners of this land. And I think connect to that reality that this nation has been an entire botanic garden looked after for so many thousands of years, the connection to the trees and the creeks and the landscapes, which our botanic gardens not only represent, but are helping to protect. And this topic today is a wonderful reflection of those threads and connections throughout the entire nation here and across the ditch over to New Zealand and the gardens that we have there. So thank you for joining us. And if you want to just let us know which lands are you joining us from? Where are you coming to our gathering today from? As I said, I'm here in Melbourne. So let us know. Thanks for there's plenty of people joining us over there on Insta. Lovely to have you with us. So to get us started, I'd like to bring Cass onto the page. I'll just bring Cass in. Where is she? Here we go. Cass, how are you? Oh, I haven't quite got her sound there at the moment. Let's see if we can get her in.
There
we go. We got you now.
Excellent. Good evening. And good evening to all of our viewers. It's, as you said, a very exciting night. It's the first day of Botanic Gardens Week. So yeah, good to be here. Also a little bit sad because it's our last webinar for the year, but we will be back next year.
Yeah. We got plenty of, we got a couple of Tasmanians joining us. Welcome, Genevieve and Giuliano. Great to have you here from down south.
And I'm coming from the very, very wet Awabakal lands, I think the Awabakal Nations. So up in Newcastle, it's very stormy and crazy up here.
Yeah, it's a bit wet up there, isn't it? I left Sydney this morning and it was pouring.
Yes, lots of flooding, actually. So stay safe to everybody up here. And
So
if you want, I'll just... Yeah, I'll just kick off, I guess, with the beginning of Botanic Gardens Week. Our theme this year is really around exploring the similarities between zoos and botanic gardens and really highlighting the fact that they do the same thing. One just happens to be with wildlife and the other is with our plants. Our campaign this year is called Guardians of the Green, and you can jump online, you can scan the QR code behind me to get a list of all the events that are taking place across botanic gardens in Australia and New Zealand. And just to name a few of those for you, we've got Kings Park, Tasmanian Arboretum, Shoalhaven Heads Native Garden, Lismore, Wollongong, Meltons, the George Brown Darwin Botanic Gardens, St Kilda, Mackay, Maroochy, Australian National Botanic Gardens, Botanic Gardens of Sydney, Melbourne, obviously where you are, Alice Springs, Coffs Harbour, and there are many, many more. So please do jump online, check out as I said, the Botanic Gardens webpage, and you can see a list of the events. You'll also note on there is a donate page, and I will just say Botanic Gardens are free to the public, and in order to remain that way, they do need your support. So please, whilst you're there checking it out, feel free to jump on the donate, hit that donate button and lend us your support. Tonight's webinar, super exciting one. Very excited about the speakers that we've got here and the topic. It really is about demonstrating how botanic gardens work together to save species. And you've got some super exciting species to talk about. We've got cycads, picture plants, or I should say carnivorous plants, not pitcher plants, carnivorous plants. And also our mountainous highland, very cold, tropical, or not tropical, cold and tropical doesn't seem to go together, but cloud forest type plants that we've got up in the mountainous regions of the tropics, all of these species which are really endangered and vulnerable, and you'll get to hear about all of them tonight. So it's super exciting.
Thanks, Cass. We've got Jelly Snake joining us from the Dandenong Ranges. We've got more people up on Awabakal country. Day for ducks, Mr. Bettridge reckons. Judgewarren country in Bendigo. Sarah, welcome, Sarah. Great to have you all here, and I think we're pretty much ready, locked and loaded to get our first speaker in. And Cass, we'll get you back at the end to wrap things up and put a big BGANZ bow on on our webinars for 2025.
Sounds good. Enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Cass. All right. Well, here we go. Let me introduce you all to our first speaker. Just got a wonderful. Let's see. Here we go. Where is it? Okay, here we go. So, our first speaker is Dr. James Clugston. Now, allow me to read a little bit about James, because our speakers are fascinating. I'm really excited about just their backgrounds and what they're up to. And I'll just read a little bit about James. James is a conservation biologist with research interests in molecular diversity and the evolution of gymnosperms and angiosperms, focusing for many of you. What you'd understand would be that his focus is on species conservation of cycads. He's passionate about these due to their interesting biology and unique adaptations that allow them to survive for millions of years. I mean, these are dinosaurs. And as we've been talking about over these 3 weeks, this idea of the Botanic Gardens being not a museum, but a living space, a zoo for these plants. His recent research focuses on developing new molecular techniques to understand their genetic diversity better and apply this to their conservation worldwide. He uses a range of molecular techniques and approaches in his conservation work, and that includes genomics, systemics, phytogenics, and plant evolution. Here's the other side of James's work. He's the co-chair of the Global Conservation Consortium for Cycads Australia, and he's an active member of the IUCN SSC. I mean, I love these acronyms because they're real, the Cycads Specialist Group. He's also affiliated with the Montgomery Botanical Center in Florida, US. So, James, absolutely fascinating. Let's let's get James in here and have a quick yak. Let me find him here in the green room. Just walking through the green room, walking past all of the wonderful canapes and drinks and beverages available online here. James, how are you?
I'm good, Costa. How are you?
Lovely to have you here. And totally, I'm a bit like you. Cycads, from when I first met and understood them and then studied them a bit more when I was doing landscape architecture, they were something that just totally captured my imagination. So reading your the work that you've done and you're doing, it was like, whoa, I want to dive in there and hear more about it.
Well, I got into Cycads when I started university, to be honest, a long time ago. I was really into dinosaurs as a kid. I wouldn't really call Cycad dinosaur plants, but there was something about them that alerted me, their biology, the structure of them makes them really interesting. And when you learn a little bit more about them, it kind of intrigues you and draws you in. Of course, I've got broad plant interest, but if I could only work on one plant for the rest of my life, I would work on Cycads. It's very
really
centric, but it's just I grow them myself at home. I talk to people in the evening about Cycads on my time off and the weekend, and I work with them all day, which is sometimes can be a bit full on, but I'm never not willing to talk about Cycads.
That's unreal. 24/7. If you need to, he's on the line, ready to have a chat. Well, look, I'll put your prezzo up and take it away.
Okay, well, this first presentation is a bit of a dense slide, but what I'm trying to cover here is if you look at these numbers, so about all the plant groups worldwide, cycads are the most conservation significant group of organisms on the planet. That not just plants, but organisms. So more than, actually, as of last week, more than 70% of cycads are either extinct in the wild, endangered, or critically endangered. And I've got two plants behind me that I've strategically placed there. One, which is a species called Encephalatus hirsutus, which is extinct in the wild. And then another one called Encephalatus cyrinus, which is extinct in the wild as well. And cyrinus was only extinct in the wild as of last year, officially, where hirsutus has been extinct a lot longer. But cyrinus is quite common in botanic gardens in Australia, where hirsutus, you will not find a single one in botanic gardens in Australia, and you probably won't find an individual plant in most botanic gardens in South Africa as well. That gives you an idea of how rare that species is. But although cycads have survived, 350 million years, they're really at threat. And this is from habitat loss and conversion, extinction of pollinators, the seed distributors, especially for Australia. And a big clause for them is the poaching and overcollection from the wild. And this is a really big problem for them. And when we think about this, it means that conservation is really important. But in order to conserve these plants, we need to think about what tools do we need to really conserve them. And from a research perspective, genetics is incredibly important. So we can understand their diversity, but we can find and understand ways to identify populations. So if you've got a plant that's taken from the wild, can you find out where it was from in the wild again and put it back if needs be, especially plants that have been illegally taken? And we need to really understand species, because as much as we want to say we really understand what species are in cycads, we don't. And we're only starting to get a grasp of this now, because we're trying to think of it this way. These things are 330 million years, and we're trying to grasp 330 million years of evolution in, say, the 250 years of the binomial system when plants were first given names. But we also need to manage populations, survey them, and also mitigate what are the threats there and how do we mitigate those threats. And the big thing is ex situ conservation. So this is conservation in what we call insurance colonies in botanic garden collections. So this is colonies of plants that you can grow. What I will say is cycads can't be conserved in seed banks. Their seeds are called recalcitrant, so the seeds don't last more than 2 years. And the problem is even cryogenic storage doesn't work. So you have to physically grow the plants themselves. And some plants are big, some plants are small. And you can think about that from a resources standpoint. If you want to hold diversity populations to conserve them, you need to have a good number of plants in the wild. And this brings us really into the next generation of what we're trying to do. I will say that I'm based at Western Sydney University, but I work for Montgomery Botanical Center as well in Miami, Florida. And Montgomery Botanical Center has the world's largest legal cycad collection in the world. And in some cases, they hold up to 98% of the genetic diversity of the species that's found in the wild, and offers a true what we call assurance colony that could be used to put plants back into the wild in the future. And this brings us really into the age of the global initiatives for cycad conservation. Now, you'll see that global conservation consortia is for many groups of plants, not just cycads, for magnolias, for oaks, for conifers, and there's lots of groups being developed there that is in combination. So when we think about for cycads, the Australia one was, sorry, the cycad one was a little bit different, because this, rather than being constructed by Botanic Gardens Conservation International, it was a joint venture between the IUCN Species Survival Commission Cycad Specialist Group, that the IUCN being, when we look at anything that's threatened or endangered, that International Union for Nature Conservation, the IUCN, is that governing body that has that criteria that most legislation is used in Australia when it comes to listing a species as threatened. So we joined together there to make sure we have zero extinction in cycads going forward where possible. And this requires really deep collaboration between many different organizations and research organizations. And so the GCC is in Australia, it's in Asia, we'll say Africa and the US at the moment. And so the major biodiversity hotspots, well, the US is not necessarily, but South America and Central America are massive biodiversity hotspots for cycads. But I will say Australia has the world's highest biodiversity for all cycads. And so Australia is a real good focus here. Now, for Australia, it's led by my good friend Vanessa Hanley, for world globally. And then for Australia, myself and Tim Ubergang from the Royal Botanic Garden Victoria are both co-chairs for Australia. So of course, I'm from the science background, and then Tim represents the horticultural background. It's so important for us to have a strong representation between science and horticulture to really forward this conservation practices. And really, this is to collaborate across various institutions and growers internationally to make sure we're doing the best possible job to conserve these plants, and then also develop networks of species stewards, which could be any members of the public that have cycads growing in their backyard or close by that can monitor them and provide input to us about potential threats or problems to these plants. And this is pretty interesting and pretty cool. But for Australia, the aim is really to develop new tools to understand genetics, but to capture the diversity, genetically at least, for these species that are endangered, and then create libraries so we can understand diversity there. But the big aim is conservation. And this is really to support, for botanic gardens to be part of this, but to support the exchange of seeds, plants and pollen between botanic gardens across Australia, and support botanic garden conservation where possible. And one of the big aims we have for Australia is by 2030 to have a complete ex situ capture, which means all of the Australian cycad species need to be in botanic garden collections somewhere across Australia. This is a real big aim for us because at the moment they're not, but we're getting there. We have a great collaboration with James Cook University and the Royal Botanic Garden Victoria. For James Cook University, you can see these pictures just here. These are Cycas cupido and Cycas desolata. These are two species from Queensland that this year are very likely are actually going to get listed as critically endangered. And so to have these conservation reserves are really important. And within a few months, these plants will be distributed from James Cook University, any excess material, which is a few hundred individuals across botanic gardens in Australia. So we're helping to support botanic gardens to increase their collections, but make sure they're of conservation priority where possible. But we think about this as how botanic gardens can support research and conservation. This is something really important to consider. And Montgomery Botanical Centre, where I work for, has an incredible cycad collection. And this is probably one of the most data-rich collections. It's a really good example of what can be done. And this is not saying that the botanic gardens in Australia are not doing a bad job, because they certainly are not. But But botanic gardens really have rich data, including information on locality and habitat, which is so important from a research and conservation perspective, and really supports the access to genetic material for research. So people like me that want to use this material, and living plant collections to aid in taxonomy and physiology. So you can use these plants to look at the physical characteristics of them to understand species and things. And of course, we can use these collections to artificially pollinate them and create seeds that have the potential to be used in the wild, and really create assurance colonies of wild populations. Now, I am using the word assurance colonies here rather than just a standard collection. So if we think about a botanic garden that has a range of cycads in their garden, those plants don't necessarily inherently have a significant conservation value. But if you've got a range of plants that you know exactly where they're from the wild, they're from separate maternal lines, so the seeds are collected from a certain female individual and stored that way. We understand the sex of them, and they have a range of diversity from the wild. They offer a really good avenue to be able to put stuff back into the wild or supplement wild populations to artificially increase their size to help with that, really, conservation-wise. And that's probably back over to Costa. I think Costa's gone, so I'm just going to talk a bit more.
Here we go. Yeah. Oh, wow. I've been taking some notes here and just fascinated by what you're saying there, particularly about that science and horticulture collaboration, that it isn't just like using all these science tools. You've got to then grow them to keep them safe and have that horticultural knowledge in different climates, different microclimates, to make all that science work that you do stay alive in the ground in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important. And the thing is, you see, it's what you've got to, what it's worth considering is that this is going to be quite frank in saying that scientists have their aims. And I'm a scientist. I was from a horticultural background, so I know really well how to grow these plants and good growing expertise. But in many ways, if you want to grow a plant efficiently, or a botanic garden wants to grow a plant, the best people to find who can grow that plant are collectors, because they have so much passion and so much experience and knowledge to grow those. And they can give us so much information on how we can succeed with these plants and kind of increase the collections and things. And this is where you can kind of come into and kind of help develop collections. And it requires really good knowledge and information combined together, really.
And that's starting to tap into this question about that difference between assurance and insurance collections, isn't it?
Yeah, so the term we're using is assurance colony, you see, not an insurance colony, because for something like Cycads, the assurance colony rather than insurance. So insurance, we don't apply that term to cycad conservation, or at least through the consortium as a whole, because we use a set terminology from that. And although could they be insurance for wild populations? No, not really. Because the truth is, you see, when a species has gone extinct from the wild, there's a knock-on effect to that, because the entire environment is changing around that species. When that species is gone, and there's a reason why that species is going extinct. So, for example, something like a Cephalotus hirsutus, putting them back in the wild isn't going to do anything. The pollinator's extinct. The environment shows there's no seed distributor for them anymore. So an assurance colony, what they're designed for is populations that are going extinct or going to be critically endangered, to the ways that we can increase the genetic diversity of those plants by, generally, if you increase a population size, you have more breeding there. That can help diversity, that can help reduce inbreeding risks and things which cause drops in diversity. That's the difference. When somebody's extinct, it makes it a lot more difficult, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it's interesting what Phil said here. He's tapping into what you're saying there, that's why the area around the Wallamai pine in the Blue Mountains was kept secret to contain and maintain, all of those details, all of the insects and the pollinators and the other plants that are working for it.
But I'll throw a spanner in the works there. The thing is, look at it this way. As a scientist, we are quite restricted in what we can do. For example, I cannot just go trekking through Wollemi National Park easily, because the amount of health and safety and risk protocols now, the Wollemi pine wasn't found by scientists. It was found by just a guy who was looking for plants with a group of people. And the thing is, when it comes to finding these plants, hobbyists, growers and collectors and people that have that interest often far better at it, you see. And the problem with the Sutus was it was described in 97 and it was extinct in the wild 8 years after its description, which is not long. And that's all from collectors. And I'm not saying that's the case in Australia, but we do have that case where collectors are finding populations before scientists can find those populations. And often they don't want to tell scientists that they know where these plants are. And that makes it quite difficult in some ways. And this is not just Australia, this is worldwide, generally speaking. But although on paper, the species of Australia are not currently listed as threatened as badly as, say, South Africa, that doesn't mean they're not. That just means those assessments haven't been updated or using old data.
So I'll just finish this. I'm kind of in two minds whether to leave this for when we have our Q&A at the end, but maybe just throw a quick answer to this one. How does an individual get involved in helping the conservation, for example, of cycads? Is there someone they can contact, or is there a way to sleeve into this process and support?
Yeah, the best way is through either myself or Tim, my colleagues, or even if you Google my name, you go to my website, there's a form you can fill in that way, and also to kind of get in touch and things. And we're still establishing networks. We've established a steering committee at the moment for Australia, and we're establishing partnerships. We haven't established any species stewards, but we're totally up for that. We're not going to say no to anybody that wants to help and provide support and things. And I will add as a plug that next year in Sydney, we will have the International Conference on Cycad Biology that's happening in Sydney. And this is where we have cycad experts throughout the world that turn up, and we are basically just there for cycad conservation and cycad research.
Oh, all right. Well, start frothing, people. Start to look that up and connect with James. So look, there's a couple more questions that have come up, but I'll save them for the back end so that we can hear from our next two speakers. James, wow, we could rock on, and looking at all the comments that have come in, we could rock on till midnight. Thank you so much. I'll drop you back to the green room and bring you back on in about 20 minutes or half an hour. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot, James. Oh, that was fantastic. So, from James and his work, our second speaker tonight, I'm just going to read a little bit about their bio, because I really loved, like I said at the top, I really loved learning about and hearing these details. But we have Dr. Alastair Robinson. Now, Alastair is Manager Biodiversity Services at the Royal Botanic Gardens here in Victoria. He manages their team of botanists researching Australia's native flora. Oh, what a gig. Wouldn't I know there's a lot of people on here that would love that, just as as a job. The delivery of the online flora identification platform called VicFlora, the library and art components of Victoria's State Botanical Collection, and the Victorian Conservation Seed Bank. Whoa, that's a few portfolios in the world of plant politics. He's a botanist and illustrator with two decades of experience leading research expeditions to remote field locations across Southeast Asia. And his own research is focused primarily on taxonomy and conservation of tropical montane flora, particularly ultramafic specialists, that soils rich in heavy metals to you and me, but also carnivorous plants worldwide, particularly tropical pitcher plants and sundews. He published a paper earlier this year describing a ridiculously hairy giant new pitcher plant from Borneo in collaboration with a Malaysian team, they chose to name it after the orangutan, Nepenthes pongoides, picked up by the Forbes, the Age, and many popular science outlets. The conservation message of their work reached an audience, wait for it, of over 95 million people. Whoa, that's what it's about, you know, and that's what a lot of our yarns this month of BGANZ have been about, talking about botanic gardens as this zoo, giving people a different context on which to appreciate this work that our botanists and conservation botanists are doing. So with no further ado, Alastair, let me bring him in. Where is he? Here we go. Alastair.
Hello, Costa. You make me sound way
Good evening. And lovely to have you with us, and absolutely fascinating work that you're doing. Wow, and what a brilliant public exposure of all things horticulture from that recent project that you've been pumping your energy into.
Absolutely. We're very lucky to be able to work on something that prominent. So a real privilege.
Well, I'll bring your slide show up, and that's a very familiar sight to me. That wonderful building.
Bumped into you right outside that building. That's right. We're very lucky to work here. But anyway, I'll crack on. Thank you for the intro. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in tonight. I'm also on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this and all the lands that we work across. My team is probably best known for the work we do in the Victorian Conservation Seed Bank. But besides banking seeds, we're mostly all botanists, and our botanical expertise plays a role in documenting biodiversity, which goes hand in hand with conservation here and overseas. To that end, I was asked to talk about a recent example species documentation work that I led in Malaysia. Now, to the BGANZ crowd, Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria is probably best known for its work in landscape succession planning, in kicking off the Climate Change Alliance, and also its significant ex situ living collections overseen by our hort wizards, and they are wizards. But our science team also generates a lot of research output, ranging from the findings of Australia's largest native orchid translocation program to our genomics and mycology and taxonomic work. Most of that research takes place in our herbarium, shown here, and the influence of herbaria like this one can be very far-reaching. At current counts, our state botanical collection holds 1.56 million plant, fungi, and algae specimens, making it Australia's largest reference collection. But what makes it Australia's most important on the world stage is that it holds 36,000 known type specimens, the largest such repository in the Southern Hemisphere. And as a reminder, a type specimen is the physical reference specimen to which any published organism name is permanently associated. This specimen to name association is true for all named plants, and this makes herbaria essential to taxonomic research, which of course goes hand in hand with species documentation, which is itself inextricably linked to conservation. This herbarium is also unusual in Australia in that 1/3 of the collection comprises overseas material dating back as far as the 1500s. So our holdings are not just locally, but globally significant in the taxonomy and conservation arena. It is very much this character of our collection that allows us to engage with overseas neighbours to support biodiversity research, conservation initiatives, and skills exchange abroad. And these holdings directly support my work documenting species. The main example I was asked to talk about tonight is a carnivorous pitcher plant, or Nepenthes, described from this mountain in the background in northern Borneo. The species publication was very highly profiled, as Costa alluded to, and a good example of a very positive international collaboration in service of conservation. Our fieldwork in Borneo took place 2 years ago now, in early May, in fact, when I led an expedition to the mountain with colleagues from Sandakan Herbarium in eastern Sabah. The climb itself, I'm afraid, is an entirely it's a separate presentation of its own because there's a lot to talk about, but I'll just say that it was tough, mainly because it involved a steep ascent through the world's finest stand of rattan or lawyer vine, and the substratum of boulders meant that there was no surface, and having to lug a lot of extra water on our backs from the one overnight deluge we had was a lot of hard work. So we were pretty relieved to finally emerge into the stunted and otherwise open summit forest, and it was in that little paradise up there that we found something extraordinary. Namely this. This is Nepenthes pongoides, officially published at the end of 2024, so quite recently. And what we found hiding between the boulders up top this mountain was essentially an undescribed giant pitcher plant with pitchers 20 to 45 centimeters tall and rosettes about 1 meter across. So plenty of excitement all around, but being diligent scientists with limited time, we really had to stay chill and get down to measuring and documenting the thing. Besides looking at morphology, we also studied its ecology, things like temperature, soil pH, pitcher pH, but also this examination of trapped prey on the right. Often a bit gross, as you can imagine, but always interesting. You can see here on the slide the digested remains of centipedes, giant millipedes, beetles, and even a crab, which I've teased out down below. But on the left of them, you can also see a pale leech-like grub. That is the unidentified carnivorous larva of some fly whose young have evolved to gestate inside the pitchers and feed off the things they trap. Amazing. Basically, you've got an entire dependent ecosystem that exists in the pitchers, and those are surely home to unknown species of their own, which is bloody brilliant. Sorry, I'm getting very excited. People hear ecosystem and they think big. No, some ecosystems can fit into your hand, and that's just how precious they are. So this is the plant's leaves and pitchers. As a Nepenthes super nerd, a combination of things told me instantly that this was a species in use of science. Obviously, it's really large, with pitchers up to 2 liters in volume, something seen in a handful of species, mostly from Borneo and the Philippines. But besides that, it's got these deeply peltate or cupped leaf tips, as you can see up top. And the pitchers also have overarching and widely flowed columns, an odd gland structure under the lid, and most parts are covered in thick, rusty red hair, as shown. This was one of the most striking characteristics, and no other known species are this hairy. And this reddish hair was why we first discussed naming the plant Nepenthes pongoides, after the orangutan genus Pongo. This idea was cemented when 2 expeditions made to document the plant found only 39 mature plants across 2 square kilometers. So it's a classic microendemic, found nowhere else. And our conservation assessment of it against the red list criteria of the IUCN easily categorized it as critically endangered. You see, this critically endangered status is shared with the orangutan because of land conversion, mostly for oil palm plantations. And those are the biggest threat to regional biodiversity. Nepenthes also face a major threat in the form of poachers, as the cycads do, and 2 sister species in Indonesia are now functionally extinct in nature thanks to horticultural demand for ornamental plants. So for us, securing the future of this plant was an urgent priority, and naming the plant as we did was calculated with that in mind. All of you know that plant blindness is a major problem. It's a root cause of underinvestment into plant conservation and botanic gardens everywhere. By tying this plant to a very much loved and charismatic animal, we hoped people would take notice, form positive associations, and act. And in this case, the Malaysian government moved immediately to review recommendations made in our paper about ex situ and in situ actions. And they are actively consulting with our Malaysian partners to establish how best to safeguard both plants and the locality in the context of Malaysian law and resourcing. We don't yet know what their plans for success will be, but it's the swiftest response we've had to any of our documentary work, which is really encouraging. Now, there was a precedent to all this. We learned firsthand that species documentation and strategic naming can have positive real-world outcomes. My first insight into the power of names occurred in 2009 when we named a different species after Sir David Attenborough. 2 years prior, in 2007, we were the first botanist team to summit this mountain, Mount Victoria in Palawan. Just below the summit, which you can see at the top on the right, we documented another giant Nepenthes. We named that plant Attenboroughii after Sir David for several reasons. He has been a lifelong long inspiration to millions, many of you here surely. He's also a self-professed admirer of Nepenthes. No one's perfect. And thirdly, this mountain is one of the most species-rich ranges in the Philippines, yet it had no protection. It was mined and it was being logged at its base. So naming a plant after a foreigner who most locals have never heard of actually may be a little bit uncomfortable. That said, the option was put out to the local traditional owners, the Tagbanua people, and they're a little bit like, yeah, whatever, if it helps our situation, it doesn't matter what you name the plant, as we'll always have our own name for it, which was very poetic. And of course, we went ahead and the press was massive with headlines and interviews and the absolute horror of live TV. But most importantly, it pointed the conservation spotlight on Mount Victoria and kicked off a grassroots campaign in Palawan to declare the mountain a protected area. Now, that's still a work in progress, but mining and logging have been strictly forbidden. Local people have voted to ensure that access to the mountain is limited to traditional owners and ecotourism use. And the pitcher plant is now the floral emblem of the municipality, which is really cool. In conservation, you often hear the phrase, we can't conserve what we don't know. This isn't necessarily true for whole ecosystems because at scale, the act of conserving an environment will preserve everything you don't know alongside the minority that you do. But documenting individual species is critical to creating hooks for conservation action. And that's what we hope to achieve in both examples I've shown. We chose powerful names to ensure the survival of the habitats as much as we did their notable flora, also giving time to other experts to inventory everything else. No one is better placed to overcome plant blindness than us, you, me, our network. So the onus on us is on us to draw attention, communicate and inspire care as best that we can. I actually saw Attenborough's new film, Ocean, last night, and it does that very thing for the ocean floor. But imagine if it had been called Plant. Last slide, I promise. What I haven't done up to this point is underscore that wherever it takes place, biodiversity documentation and the conservation work that it fosters cannot occur effectively without local knowledge. We in Australia have phenomenally skilled botanists with reams of transferable technical skills. On the other hand, our partner institutions in Southeast Asia are bursting with brilliant minds full of plant and ecosystem knowledge, but they face a bottleneck in that they don't often have equal access to training or technology, which means that many skilled scientists are unable to achieve as much as they could under better circumstances. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity to engage with our neighbours to support all areas of conservation. In the case of Nepenthes pongoides, it was really our incredible partners at Sandakan Herbarium that allowed this work to happen. So in addition to thanking you, Costa and BGANZ, I'll end by thanking them for their faith in our ongoing partnership. Thank you.
Wow. I'm just catching my breath after that. Thanks, Alastair.
Pleasure.
That was just brilliant, and a Nepenthes super nerd.
Well,
that is the best title. And you mentioned 45 centimeters, did you?
That's right. It not the largest species known, but it's up there. And that slide I showed had one of my colleagues who's actually took the time to pour water into the pitchers to see how large they were.
Wow, that is incredible. I got a question here. Like, you talked about documenting species rather than discovering species. Like, how deliberate is that choice of language in terms of everything that you were sharing around, their conservation? You want them in the spotlight, but you're also crafting a very cautious framework to protect them at the same time.
Absolutely. That choice of language is quite deliberate. There's sort of two aspects to your question, but there may be rare cases, where we really are the first people ever to set eyes on a plant or animal in inaccessible locations. But that's overwhelmingly not the case, especially in frequently visited areas or those with traditional owner communities. So the whole idea that recognition spontaneously occurs under the gaze of modern science, it's a bit marginalizing and feels a bit outdated and colonial. I mean, I've named several species that I recognize as new because I was an expert for the genus in question, knowing full well that they'd been seen by other people before who didn't have that knowledge. And citizen science through things like iNaturalist is a case in point, things that everyday folk have seen and brought to our attention. So I hate using the word discover in the context of what I do. And in terms of keeping information about habitats vague, that's really important. In the case of this plant, the location was already known amongst poachers, and so there was nothing to be lost by just naming it in the paper and giving the government all of the information they need to make the best and most informed conservation decisions.
And there was one other question here. Are either of these giants protected in ex situ conservation collections as yet?
No, actually. So Nepenthes pongoides is too recently described, and the population was so small that removing plants was too risky for us to consider. Even taking the specimen for the herbarium, we just took a cutting, which is completely sustainable. Also, we're yet to find it in flower, but when we do, seeds will be the best means of establishing it elsewhere. As for Nepenthes attenborii, that does grow in a couple of botanic gardens, but through tourism, seeds do seem to have entered the horticultural sphere now. And it's grown quite widely on most continents and sold by carnivorous plant nurseries through tissue culture. And that's taken a lot of pressure off the poaching issue for that species, at least.
Yeah, that sort of answers a question here. Any recommendations for individuals on how they ensure they're buying plants not collected illegally? So
reputable sources. If you go on Facebook, Facebook doesn't police illegal plant trafficking, so you will often see pictures of plants that clearly came out of the ground. Tempting as it may be, don't go for it. The damage you're doing is immense.
Wow. Well, Alastair, thank you for a captivating presentation. Again, we could carry on long into the night, but I'll move on to our third speaker and then just bring you back for a quick Q&A.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, so bringing into our third and final speaker for this evening, this is Dr. Darren Crayn. Now, Darren's the inaugural director of the Australian Tropical Herbarium, a joint venture of James Cook University, the CSIRO, the Queensland Government, and the Commonwealth Department of Environment and Energy. Appointed in 2008, he's led this organisation through the establishment and growth phases. It now boasts a significant national and international profile. His research interests include studies of taxonomy, evolution and conservation of Australia's and the region's tropical flora. Darren's career has involved research in many tropical countries, including Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Panama, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, and Venezuela. I mean, it's amazing to think Darren and Alastair are going out into the wild and experiencing these moments with plants firsthand. As a leader in the plant sciences in Northern Australia, Darren's held positions on a range of advisory and rep bodies, advising state and local governments and professional societies and peak bodies, with roles on granting bodies as well. So I'm super keen to bring Darren in. So let's jump back across here and I'll find Darren in the green room. He must be hiding up the back. I can see somewhere. A sec, where is he? Darren. Here we go, Darren. Welcome, Darren. How are you going?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Costa. Yeah, and hello to everybody who's tuned in tonight.
Thank you for joining us and warming up the green room early on before we came on board tonight. Everyone, Darren sort of explained to us that he's just in the nice warm tropics, and quite a few of us are down here in Victoria, which became somewhat fresh yesterday and this morning. So enjoying the fact that you're living the tropical work that you love and do every day. Wow, what a fantastic trident we've had tonight, and really keen to hear from you. So I'll just put your presentation up, Darren, and take it away.
All righty.
Here we go. I've got it here. and I'll just slide into the distance.
Well, thanks again, Costa. And yeah, look, I'm coming to everyone tonight from Irukandji country, which is just north of Cairns in the beautiful tropics of northeastern Australia. And I'm not going to apologise if the weather where you are is not as good as the weather where I am, which it undoubtedly isn't. Anyway, that's why I live here. But I want to talk to you about tonight. And firstly, just let me thank Alastair and James. They were extraordinary talks, and for a plant nerd like me, extremely inspiring and interesting. And it just reminds me what a great gig a botanist is. We're all pretty grateful to do what we do, and to be allowed to, and to be paid for it. But what I wanted to talk to you all tonight about was a project that I've led since about 2012. So it's been running for a few years now. And what we've been interested in doing is trying to protect and conserve the plants of the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, which is this amazing part of the tropical northeast of Australia. It's a fairly small sliver of land, but it's globally significant. It's ranked 6th of all 173,000 protected areas worldwide because it captures such a unique suite of species that are found nowhere else. So it's got a whole bunch of species which are not replicated in other protected areas, which is why it's ranked so highly. So it's an extraordinarily important area. And I'm one of the few people who are fortunate enough to live on its borders and to be able to work in it. And one of the most special parts of this tropical landscape in the World Heritage Area are the cloud forests, which are the areas above about 1,000 metres of altitude, about 1 kilometre up into the sky. And they're called cloud forests because they're literally in the clouds. And they have a lot of species that are found nowhere else. We've documented at least 80 species of plants that are found just on the mountaintops of this small sliver of the coast of northeastern Queensland. So this is what a tropical montane cloud forest looks like. It's misty almost all of the time, even when it's bright sunshine and warmth down below in the lowlands. And if you look up into the highlands and you see clouds on the peaks, this is what you'll experience if you're sitting inside them. And it's much, much cooler. It's almost constantly wet. The clouds deliver a lot of moisture into those forests, even in the dry season when it's not actually raining. And all of that moisture, of course, supports an incredible diversity of plants and all of the other organisms that exist in the habitat that the plants create. And here's some of the most special, I think, of those mountaintop endemics, those cloud forest endemics of the wet tropics. We've got Australia's only 2 rhododendron species found on the mountains up here, Rhododendron viriosum and Rhododendron lockyiae. We've got one of the leatherwoods. If you're in Tasmania, you'll be familiar with the leatherwoods that grow down there. We've got a tropical species in the north up here. It's found only on one peak, one small population of goodness knows how many plants, but it would be less than a few dozen. So extremely restricted, extremely rare, also extremely beautiful. And here's a quandong, an Elaeocarpus species. Again, these mountaintops are replete with plants that are, I can imagine would be highly desirable if they were ever brought into horticulture. So why are we working there? We're working there because we did a modelling study a few years ago which aimed to predict how much habitat these plants would have left under future climate scenarios. And we know climate change is a huge issue for plants everywhere, but it's a particularly big issue for things that grow on mountaintops, because as the climate warms, organisms can potentially migrate, but if you're already sitting on the top of a mountain, you can't go any further up as the climate warms. So you're trapped and you eventually run out of space and you run out of time. So mountains or mountaintops, and particularly tropical mountaintops, are some of the most putatively threatened habitats by climate change on Earth. And this graph shows quite starkly, I think, how the extent of habitat is predicted to decline for these mountaintop landscapes in the wet tropics. And for many of the 19 species we analysed here, they're likely to have very little habitat left by the year 2080 if the climate change scenarios play out as we think they will. So what do we do about it? That's a really thorny problem because it's not like the threats to these landscapes are logging or poaching like they are for the glorious pitcher plants and the cycads. The threat is climate change. And as a botanical community, really, what can we actually do about that? It's a global issue. It needs a global response. What we can do about it, though, is we can try to conserve some of these plants in plant zoos, in botanic gardens, as a precautionary approach. And so we launched a project a few years ago, largely inspired. A shout out to the Dandenong Ranges Botanic Gardens, by the way. They host the, I suppose, a collection of the Australian Rhododendron Society Victoria. And in many ways, they were the initial inspiration for this entire project because they came to talk to us about the rhododendrons and the conservation of the rhododendrons of the wet tropics. And that led into this project, which is far greater than I think any of us would have imagined when we started. But we formed this consortium to try and attack this problem of conservation of these extraordinary and extremely rare and threatened mountaintop plants. We gathered together a bunch of botanic gardens down the east coast of Australia, a bunch of different kinds of research labs, and we all set out to create a conservation collection that was distributed across multiple botanic gardens and it was replicated across multiple botanic gardens so that we could guard against, if you like, the loss of the collection at any one place. The first thing, of course, was to get out and collect the plants, and for the horticulturalists, particularly the ones at Cranbourne in Victoria and the ones at the ANBG in Canberra, to do all of the necessary horticultural experimentation to bring these plants into cultivation, many of which were not known in cultivation before. So there was a lot of work needed to be done by some very clever people. This is what those cultivation experiments looked like. But it wasn't just the cultivation, it was an important aspect of this particular project. There are also other sort of streams of activity that were equally important. So we thought it important not just to rely on living plants growing in the ground in botanic gardens. We thought we'd try and attack the seed banking approach as well. So this wonderful group of scientists, again from the ANBG, but also from Plant Bank in the Botanic Gardens of Sydney. They did a lot of really great research and really cracked some of the problems of seed banking rainforest plants, which are typically much more difficult than seed banking other kinds of plants. We had some scientists up here at JCU working on the plant physiology, because one of the things we really don't know about plants and climate change, particularly on the tropical mountains, is actually how they're going to respond to being warmer and possibly drier. So we did some glasshouse experiments, and I'm sorry to say we tortured a few plants, but we found out a lot more about how they might actually respond to climate change. We did a lot of genetics, a wonderful group of people, again, Botanic Gardens of Sydney, but also here at JCU and a team in New Zealand. We wanted to know what the genetic diversity was among the populations we were sampling the collections from to bring into botanic gardens, so that our conservation collections could replicate the wild genetic diversity to the greatest possible extent, which is really important if you're aiming to have conservation collections which match wild diversity. And one thing that we did at the outset of the project was we thought communications are important. We're talking about big themes here, climate change and plant death. Let's do a communication strategy that none of us really know how to do, and that was to use art. So we brought on board this wonderful woman, Donna Davis, who's a visual artist who created some fantastic artworks out of the project. Leaf mandalas from some of the plants that we were working on. She projected those onto the outsides of buildings. She held exhibitions and did a whole lot of really great work and got the messages out there in ways that we scientists could never have done effectively. And just to finish up, of course, the point of all of this was to have plants growing in well-managed botanic gardens under the tutelage of experts, so that they were conserved for the future and for the appreciation of the public. And we're pleased to say that so far we've got about 40 species that have completed propagation trials, and more than 30 of those are now at least partially secured in living collections at one or more of those botanic gardens. But the work's ongoing. There's still a lot more left to do. We haven't even collected half of the threatened species, or the species we know are restricted just to those mountaintops, let alone done all the work we need to do on the ones we have collected. So thank you very much, and look, an acknowledgement to all of the people who've been involved in this project. There've been many of them. It's been an absolute joy, and I hope it continues. Thanks, Costa. Back to you.
Wow, thank you, Darren. Fascinating stuff. I mean, I think the thing that rang loudest for me was just when you talk about these cloud forests, and you said that so many of those other things that Alastair spoke about are, human impact. Whereas here, that idea that if you're at the top of the mountain, there's nowhere to go, like that sort of resonates really loudly in terms of that kind of the responsibility, but equally that kind of precarious reality for these things, and then the knock-on effect, as someone asked in one of the questions here, what's with the pollinators and all of the support crew as they get pushed further and further up the mountain. It's the same deal, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Plants don't exist in isolation. They're part of an ecosystem, as you know, when you try and put them in pots. And, people have spoken about the pollinators and the seed dispersers, but there's also all of the mycorrhizal fungi, there's all of the bacteria, there's all of the viruses, there's all of the animals that depend upon the plants for sustenance, for shelter, and all of those sorts of things. Ecosystems are impossibly complex. We are barely beginning to scratch the surface of even the ones that are the best studied. And the ones that are the best studied are not in the tropics. The ones that are in the tropics are, we've got this. Being a tropical biologist is such a great gig for all sorts of reasons. One of which is that you have virtually no competition. There aren't that many of us relative to the number of questions you can ask and the number of ecosystems you can work in. If you look around the world, most of the scientific capability is in the temperate band in the northern hemisphere, right across Europe and North America, and to a certain extent in the temperate band in the southern hemisphere, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, and so on and so forth. But most of the biodiversity is in the tropics, and there aren't very many institutions that are well funded and have a good history and really well connected globally to be able to study those. So there's like an inverse relationship between the diversity and the expertise. So you never run out of things to do.
How hard is it to replicate, these cloud forest conditions in botanical gardens outside of the tropics, for example, if we're going to go for those out ex situ?
Well, if you aim to replicate those conditions exactly, it's probably pretty hard and pretty expensive because you'll need a cloud house of some kind. But experience increasingly is telling us that many of these things will grow quite happily in the ground in Melbourne and in Canberra and in Sydney, even though they're restricted in the wild to cool, wet mountains at altitude in the tropics. And so, I think one of the things we're starting to appreciate is they have much greater tolerances than you would expect that they have, given why they found only on the mountaintops if they can grow in warmer, drier conditions. And I guess if you keep enough water up to them in cultivation, they generally do quite okay. But it does then beg all those other questions, is what's keeping them on the mountaintops? If it's not really the temperature, they're not really, you know, demanding of that temperature and humidity. The plants themselves, what is keeping it there? And I guess the next set of answers to that questions that we might want to investigate would be, well, is it the absence of particular diseases? Is it the presence of particular pollinators? Is it the presence of particular mycorrhizal fungi? It's really about all of those ecosystem factors, not simply the temperature and humidity and the plant in isolation. Impossibly complex systems, we have to try and reduce them down to small parameters that we can measure and manipulate in order to get some understanding of what's going on.
Well, Darren, thank you for sharing that and bringing that down to a level for all of us listening here on these platforms today, because the comments and the engagement has been fantastic, and we really appreciate your time. And while you're there, I'm just going to bring Alastair in, and where's James? I'll bring James in as well, and Cass, come on. And I've got a couple of questions. Is there anything that either of you would like to ask each other or follow up on in terms of what you saw in each other's talks?
So many questions.
Yeah, throw one.
Well, maybe one for James in terms of the ex situ conservation. How do you kind of approach it with Cycads, James? I suppose getting back to the question of, how do you replicate a cloud forest environment? Are Cycads similarly particular about where they grow, or do you have a lot more potential ex situ sites available to you than might be available for other more particular plants?
I think that where is what is particularly down, because the thing is, you see, what we can grow, if something's in a particular environment, that doesn't mean it's necessarily fixed to that environment, because every single species has some level of plasticity in its in what it's showing morphology wise and how it can adapt to an environment. For example, if we talk about Queensland cycads, where, for example, species that grow relatively close to Darren, not necessarily in the tropics, but in the drier regions and things, these species can do really well in cultivation in, say, as far as New South Wales. Victoria, not so much. The biggest problems that they have is that when it gets cold and the root systems are wet, soil-borne pathogens, if you've got a very organic growing medium, can be a big problem. And so when it comes to the plants that are growing at James Cook University, I'll make a point of saying that we had an agreement with James Cook University to distribute these plants after 2 to 3 years was the aim. And Brandon at James Cook University already wants to distribute them. And we thought that was a bit soon, but until he sent me pictures of these plants, that they're pretty much the size or bigger than the size I would expect them to be in 3 years after a year. And I'm like, okay, wow, this is quite soon. So that's where you've got sort of ideal growing conditions. But of course, not every single botanic garden in Australia has those same conditions. And you've got to consider, what is the probability of these plants doing well here? And the way this comes down to is record keeping and having good charts of which individual accessions are being sent to places, what collections these plants are doing well at, what collections are these plants not doing too well at. Because of course, theoretically speaking, a council-run garden might not have the same capability or glasshouse capability as, say, Botanic Gardens of Sydney or Royal Botanic Garden Victoria. So, but my thinking is that every single species has some level of plasticity and that it can physically express environmental adaptation. And just because it's growing on one particular mountainside, that doesn't mean it can't grow anywhere else. It's just evolved and isolated in that wrong location.
Or historical factors have meant that it's retreated there and not being able to expand back out again when the times improve.
That's certainly paralleled with ultramafic endemic plants. So they occur in soils that are heavy in nickel, cadmium, etc. And often they're just really good hyperaccumulators or excluders of those toxic elements. But that just gives them a competitive advantage, but they grow very well anywhere else, but not as well as other plants can.
Yeah.
Alastair, how did Sir David react to having this plant
Look,
named
as you can
after
tell
him?
just by looking at the man, David is so lovely about everything. He's just as charming as he appears on film, and he said he was proper chuffed, a bit street that, but yeah, he was very down to earth about it. He wrote a letter to my co-author Stuart, who sent him a copy of our paper when it was published, and he expressed how humbled and honored he was. And he said as much again when we finally had the opportunity to shake hands. So yeah, just lovely about the whole thing. So
yeah. I sort of picked up this thread through the three of you in terms of just that parallel role of engagement with people and citizen science. What do you each think about how citizen science can contribute meaningfully to the threads of your conservation work?
Well, if I may go, if you consider the fact that we're facing an extinction emergency at a time when investment in botany is at an all-time low, citizen science through platforms like iNaturalist is phenomenally powerful. We still have major gaps in our understanding of where plants occur, their limits, and how they're changing over time. And what you end up with in citizen science is effectively thousands and thousands of extra eyes and feet on the ground. In 2023, we actually published a paper documenting 6 new sundew species, 4 completely new to science and 2 rediscovered after like 100 years. Of the 6, 4 were actually brought to our attention through citizen science. So we even included that in the title of the paper, which began Citizen Science and Taxonomic Revision, blah, 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 blah. So immense potential, I think.
Yeah. This was an interesting question from Scarlett. How do you all work alongside the Indigenous cultural and spiritual knowledge in those places in identifying plants, and how much influence does it have on the work that you're doing out there?
Do you mind if I respond to that? I have to point out that's my daughter. Who asked that question? Thanks, darling.
It is too. Yeah, it's Crayn. I kind of was too busy reading the comment. I just like, oh yeah, this is from Scarlett, and I didn't join the family dots there.
Yeah.
She's drilling you from the other room.
Yeah, I hope you do a good job of answering now. It's critically important. I mean, as you said at the start, Costa, Indigenous peoples just in Australia have been managing this country, managing its landscapes, managing its botanical treasures for tens of thousands of years. And the landscape is not a wilderness. The landscape has always been managed, or at least for tens of thousands of years. And there are very few, if any, places on this continent that can be truly called a wilderness, because all of them have had some sort of influence of Indigenous management of some form over them. So it's critically important to work hand in hand where that's possible and useful to both parties with the traditional owners, not only because it's respectful, because we're working on their country and working with their traditional knowledge and I suppose the end point of their management systems, but also they have a bottomless well of knowledge about how the ecosystem works and what's in it and what it's doing. And I think as scientists, we're only really starting now to listen properly to Indigenous voices around biodiversity conservation, but about how the ecosystems work. And it's come way too late. We're now facing the extinction crisis that we possibly could have averted to some extent had we been more sensitive and respectful of Indigenous knowledges.
Wow, look, I could throw a few more questions, but it's getting up to 1:15 now, and I don't want to blow right out our time, because I think we could keep going for another hour without even thinking about it. It's been absolutely fascinating. If either of you get the chance to have a little flick through the live broadcast tomorrow, because there'll probably be a few more questions. So anyone listening, if you've got any more questions, feel free to drop them in, and you know, our wonderful guests will have a little bit of a flick through and answer anything that we haven't answered now. But wow, it's been fantastic. I just want to I'll bring Rebecca in too, and hand over to Cass to sort of wrap things up, and yeah, just give a general thanks to everyone who's been behind the webinars this year and their success. Over to you, Cass.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say, I mean, talk about go out on a bang. Like, you three speakers were just, you guys were incredible. You know, I knew tonight was going to be good, but I found it so inspirational. And so thank you so much. I think, this is really Botanic Gardens Week is really about highlighting what Botanic Gardens are doing that the average person is not aware of. And the projects that you guys just spoke about were exactly that. And it really demonstrates the value of the work that is being undertaken and the expertise that sits within the Botanic Gardens, and the people that they're working with. Obviously, you aren't all from Botanic Gardens, so it just demonstrates that those relationships and that network globally is so significant. So thank you all. And a big shout out to Julia Watson. So she is from South Africa. She's originally a Kiwi, but in South Africa now, and she's been helping us throughout the whole Botanic Gardens Week. So thank you so much, Julia. And Rebecca, who you saw very briefly on the screen there before. I'm sure she's still out there. She does so much behind the scenes work. Bring it back. She's she's my Robin, Batman and Robin. Couldn't do it without her. So thanks so much, Rebecca. And obviously, Costa, thank you for hosting our webinars. It's always so great to reach an entire new audience for the Botanic Gardens. So we couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. And as we said, it is Botanic Gardens Week now. So make sure you get out to your Botanic Gardens, support them, go to their events. As I said, check out the QR code on there. You can see a list of all the events, and can support them through donating as well. But yes, it's such an awesome webinar series we've had this year. Tonight's, as I said, really finished it with a bang, but there's more activities going on. So make sure you get out there and see your Botanic Gardens. See them for what they really are, I think, is the key.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Cass. And yeah, it's such, I'll just finish off by saying, all of the speakers that we've had, there are so many incredible individuals working in their space, but also collectively, incredible women, incredible men, incredible groups doing all of this work at different levels of our Botanic Gardens. And this is a wonderful little window for us to sort of spray this information out and get it to people in a relaxed way, but also personal. So, Darren and James and Alastair, thank you for being so personal about it and being accessible for us to have this webinar and have it out there for people to tap in and watch over the next period of time, and particularly over Botanic Gardens Week. It was really, 15, 20 minutes each was kind of like a tease in real terms to get this look into your worlds and think that you're going off and, carting your way up a mountain or going to all of these, really different locations, even exotic locations in Australia to seek these microclimates and support these incredible plants and their ecosystems. You are all champions, everyone that you associate with and work with take back our appreciation wherever and whenever you go, and look forward to crossing you in the horticultural soup, as I could call it. It's been a joy, and until we return next year, enjoy Botanic Gardens Week, everyone. Check out what Cass said, all of those links. Botanic Gardens Week Australia, check it out. BGANZ, jump on there and support your botanic gardens. There's plenty on during the week and on the weekend particularly. So from all of us here tonight, from Rebecca, Cass, Alastair, James, and Darren, we wish you a good night. And it's all about the plants. See ya.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.